So yeah, let's get started. Welcome to the LiveCast, everyone. I'm Rich Gibbons with SpeakInc. We're a speakers bureau here in San Diego, California, and it's a pleasure to be joined by our pal at the Institute for Health and Human Potential in Toronto, Canada, Dr. JP Pawliw-Fry. Hello again, JP.
Yeah, hi Rich, great to be here. Thanks everyone for joining. Really excited about talking about the challenges that you're facing, your leaders are facing, and how we can equip your leaders to be more effective in dealing with those challenges. So Rich, over to you to start.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of great content here, and JP's picked out some real nuggets that are going to be valuable. For those that don't know JP, I'm going to test my reading skills here and give a quick intro. JP Pawliw-Fry is the co-author of the New York Times best-selling book, Performing Under Pressure, The Science of Doing Your Best When It Matters Most. He has taught executive education at Kellogg and is the co-founder of the Institute for Health and Human Potential. He speaks widely and acts as an advisor to the U.S. Navy, Army, CIA, numerous Fortune 100 companies, as well as Olympic, NBA, and NFL teams on thinking, performing, and leading under pressure. So I wanted to just give a 60-second background on how this came to be. Our company does not represent talent exclusively. We don't go to anybody and sign them. We get to work with keynoters and thought leaders who are really at the top of their game in delivering consistent results. And for many years, we've been placing JP on corporate platforms, delivering keynotes all over the world with fantastic results. But most recently, however, I had the opportunity to personally get to serve as matchmaker role, but also sit in the audience as an audience member. And I was really, there are a number of elements of JP's program that I found enormously valuable, and I can touch on those later. But I'm just delighted that we can bring, again, this is not the whole ball of wax. This is a small segment of JP's material, and I'm excited to bring it to some of our customers. But you know, one thing I came away with after seeing you live, JP, I get to see a lot of speakers, and it's really enjoyable as an audience member when you see somebody really authoritative, in your case, talking about exceptional leadership, emotional intelligence, performing under pressure, of course. But it's really enjoyable as an audience member when you look up on the platform and you see somebody presenting that they just look like they're having fun, and it seems to be the case with you.
Well, you know, I have a lot of passion for this material, and you know what's clear is that the Institute, we survey over 38,000 people a month. So we have a database to pull from. And so I'm passionate about, let's bring some science, but I'm also passionate about how can we make whatever it is that we, you know, whatever research we come up with, good ideas, that we make it accessible and sticky and interactive. Because I think what I'm seeing today, Rich, and I'm sure a lot of your clients are as well, the training budgets are going down. People, or at least have less time to do learning and development. So keynotes and meetings are important places to not just inspire people, but to also get really good ideas, you know, challenge them with ideas, challenge them to think differently.
Right, right. So let's get right into it. And just to give it a really quick housekeeping here, we've got about a 30-minute window. We want to respect everybody's time. We're going to dive into the material, and during the course of that, you know, we're using Zoom as a platform here. There's some chat functionality where JP will be soliciting some feedback from you as participants. We'll be leveraging that technology. And then at the conclusion of the 30 minutes, JP is going to make himself available for some Q&A after the fact. So excited about the structure here. So JP, you're all over the world. You're talking to a wide array of customers and industries. You know, what are you seeing out there as the big challenges that all these companies are facing now?
Yeah, great question. So what we did in preparation for this executive briefing is that we had people fill out an organizational survey, a challenge index is what we call it. And so Tomer, who's actually the president of the Institute for Health and Human Potential, is going to bring it up for us. Thank you so much, Tomer. So this is what we heard from you, as well as some of our other research. Number one, what we're seeing, and I'm going to give you, Tomer, I'm going to ask you to actually forward the slides to take the control back. But number one, we're seeing competitive pressure and industry disruption, and that is so widespread that I'm shocked not only at how disruptive the environment is, but the speed of which things are changing today. That's number one. Number two, we're also seeing that organizations are having to think about who is their customer and how do we attract that customer, and how do we do experiments with our customers to get feedback to make our offering better. And then number three, the biggest challenge that we're seeing is this employee engagement. So yes, some jobs are leaving, and there's a big change in the workplace. And I think the biggest other thing is how employees are feeling more disengaged. And of course, as you can see with these three, if you don't have employee engagement, boy, it's really hard to adapt to the changing environment, to adapt to disruption, to think about how we can serve customers more effectively. So those are the big three that we've seen. How about you, Rich? What are you seeing out there in the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. Talking to corporate customers and trade groups, we hear these themes every day.
Yeah, so I guess the real question now is, and this is what we want people to, you're here, you've spent time to join with us on this executive briefing. We want to give you some ideas. What can organizations do to equip their leaders to deal with this speed of change? So Rich, I'm going to ask you to start, and I'm going to ask everyone else on the line to also think about this. And we're going to make this interactive like we do the keynotes that I deliver. So Rich, I want you to think in your mind about an exceptional leader you've had in your career. Mm-hmm. I want you to think of one particular individual, and I want everyone who's attending to do the same thing. Think of that one individual. And I want everyone to start to think about what are the qualities that differentiated that individual. So get that in your mind right now. So Rich, why don't you just give us a smattering of, what that exceptional leader, what are the qualities of that exceptional leader?
Well, the person I'm thinking about was, they exuded a confidence. They were reliable, sort of emotionally stable is a little over the top, but they had a positive outlook, and they imbued the people around them with confidence. And then secondarily, I think they had confidence in the people they worked with.
Right. So let me ask you this, and I want everyone to think about this as well. What did you give to this leader that, when you think of a term we call discretionary effort or extra effort, what did you give to this exceptional leader because of the way they showed up?
Well, we've all had those. We've all worked with those people where you don't want to give any extra effort, but when you really felt a partnership with that leader, I think you felt much more liberated to invest a lot more of yourself. I mean, certainly in terms of the clock, you invested extra time. You were probably a lot more willing to take some risks and know that they were going to have your back.
Right.
But that it really invests more of yourself rather than, with the opposite, just kind of phoning it in.
Sure. So here's what I'd like everyone to do. Go to your chat function, and I'd like everyone to think about what did you give to, actually it's a poll, not a chat function, but I'd like you to go to this poll, and I want you to think about, on a scale of 1 to 5, how much did you give to your exceptional leader? And 5 being the most, like what Rich just described, 1 being the least. So I'd love us to do a little poll here where we try to understand how much did you give to your exceptional leader. So do it now if you would. Okay, so I mean, this isn't surprising, is it? The vast majority, 67% almost, is in the top box, 5 out of 5, and then 4 out of 5, and there's probably a few that were in the lower one. I think what's interesting about this is that when we think about the challenges that we're facing, where people need to experiment more, where people need to put themselves out there and take more of a risk, because I think discretionary effort is not just about time, because people are giving a lot of time. It's about taking that personal risk to try something new, to offer an idea where, in a sense, they feel a bit exposed. And when you have an exceptional leader who has their back, just the way you described it, Rich, that's difference making in terms of adapting at this new speed of change.
Right.
So here's what I'd like to now have people do. I want you to think about the exceptional leader qualities. So Rich started to talk about this, but again, now this is when I want to use the chat. And just before we do, we're going to go to a slide. I want to talk about the qualities, the buckets that we need to be an exceptional leader. So Tomer, if you want to go to the slides, here's what we know. When we look at high performers, there are 3 buckets that drive high performance. One is how smart we are, right? This is IQ, cognitive ability, analytical ability. And this is what we reinforce all the way through school, right? You've got an IQ of so much. Next, we have technical skills, and every job changes. Sometimes you have an accountant has a different set of technical skills than an engineer has. And then finally, there's this bucket of emotional intelligence, or EI, or sometimes known as EQ. And that is roughly how I manage my emotions as a manager or leader, and then how I manage the emotional environment around me. So how I do have someone's back, how I connect and collaborate with them, but how I manage my thinking under pressure, how I manage my emotions under pressure. So here's what I'd like to do. I would like everyone to go to the chat box and type in the qualities of your exceptional leader. So Rich gave us some of his. So I'm going to ask people to go in and just type in. And in fact, by the way, you can, as you're typing in, you have a choice. And please, direct it. You'll see you can do it to panelists, or you can do it to panelists and attendees. Put it to both. So Rich and I can take a look and people can see. And I want to survey all of us and see what are the qualities that make up that exceptional leader.
Yeah, there's a little pick list. It says 2: and then you got a pick list to choose from. And while people are answering, this was one of the fun things about being in JP's audience not long ago. He actually does this with Post-it notes, and instead of chat box function, you're actually writing it down on Post-it notes. This was a smaller keynote where it allowed people to write it down, and then he had these different buckets on different easels. And at first blush, I thought, these Post-its are going to be affixed to the 3 buckets in a fairly even-handed way, but that's not what happened.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Rich, as we're seeing the qualities come in, I want everyone to just pay attention to some of the qualities. I see gracious, I see kind, has your back. Again, inspires achievement. How many of these are IQ qualities? And what's interesting is when you take a look, you see that, are any of them IQ qualities? And now look, as we're taking a look at this, trustworthy, thank you. The vast majority, let me tell you the research, right? So just from the people who are on this executive briefing, we can see that very few are IQ or technical skills. The vast majority are emotional intelligence. And what Rich is talking about is that we try to make our keynotes interactive so people get an experience that tells them some truth about what makes an exceptional leader. And what's clear is that IQ is not a great predictor of exceptional leadership. It's not. In fact, we call it, once you cross a certain line, what we call an entrance criteria of a certain amount of IQ, beyond that certain line, any more doesn't give you a big advantage, right? So once you cross a line, and everyone on this executive briefing, I'm sure, has enough. In fact, Warren Buffett says it better than I. If you've got an IQ of 150, take 30, sell it, get some value for it, which is a great line, because he knows the research. which is to say that when people are able to have enough IQ and technical skills, the difference maker, the excellence criteria, as opposed to entrance criteria, is emotional intelligence. Now, here's another really important piece, Rich, and you know this. IQ is concreted at a certain age, around 16, 17. My daughter, by the way, just turned 17, 18, just turned 18. So I had to tell her, Gracie, you're done. You're not going to get any more IQ.
That's it.
But whereas emotional intelligence can grow, but that's if you're willing to take a risk, if you're willing to be courageous, if you're willing to be open to feedback. And I think what's interesting is those are the qualities. They actually build emotional intelligence, but those are the qualities that inspire people to take the risks that are required today to deal with disruption.
Sure, sure. Well, the one little bit of color, and I didn't want to be the spoiler, but what was amazing to me is as you requested that everybody come to the front of the room and affix their Post-it notes to the three different buckets, and you looked at your Post-it note and you was like, well, that's an emotional intelligence thing. And very, very quickly, the other two were a little bit more sparsely populated. The emotional intelligence easel was packed so densely with Post-it notes that they were overlapping each other. It was tiled. So when you stood back and you look at these three, it was unequivocal, where that power lies.
Yeah, and so the great news is that this is something that every organization can grow and learn and develop in their leaders. And so, why don't we switch to learning a little bit more about emotional intelligence and especially the science of, because what we find is that when people understand that there's a real science, there's a brain science behind emotional intelligence, boy, that gets them to take a risk to learn what it is and to learn to grow the skills.
Right. So if we know this, and obviously in the session I attended, you really have to be made a Samsonite not to get it. What do we do with that information? How do we leverage it?
By the way, Rich, what's a Samsonite?
Samsonite, you're I guess made of the same material a suitcase is made out of. You're dense.
Okay. That's great. So sorry, what was the question again?
To the extent you understand and embrace that a lot of those qualities are in the emotional intelligence bucket, how do we leverage that concept, that idea to effect?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, people need to understand what it is and then see from their own point of view that, wow, this is something I need to grow and I can grow. And actually, we're going to go to the slides now and talk about the brain under pressure, because this to us is one of the things that organizations and leaders find really powerful. So there's a couple parts of the brain, and the first is the pink little piece in the brain called the amygdala. And this is the emotional part of our brain. And this is that, you can go to the next build, Tomer. This is what allows us to learn for the first time. Why? Because it's our source of emotional memory, right? So for many of us, and go to the next one, Tomer, we'll never forget where we were during 9/11 when we saw these really challenging images, or when we got that call at 3 a.m. So it's our source of emotional memory. And what the amygdala is there to do is to check the environment for threat. And so it answers that one critical question for human survival, which is, do I eat it or does it eat me? By the way, this is why it's hard to have difficult conversations in organizations, because people might have scripts to have difficult conversations, but if they can't manage their emotions, they'll never get to the place of managing the threat to step forward and have the conversation. So the first part is the amygdala. The second part of our brain is the prefrontal cortex, or the neocortex. And this is where our IQ brain resides. And this part of the brain is, really important because it's obviously where we think. And this is important, and this is an important piece that we want to talk about. So go to the next slide, if you will, Tomer. So this is this idea of working memory. Now, you can see 4 markers on the screen. And I don't know how well you can see me because I'm a bit of a thumbnail for you, but I'm holding up 4 markers. And in a sense, thinking is this idea that we can hold in our mind on like a mental scratch pad. There's like a space. And in that space, we can hold on to 4 ideas or 4 markers. That's how we talk about it. And as we go about our day, and let's say we're calm or relaxed, we pull from different parts of our brain to think. So we pull from our long-term memory. There's one marker. We pull from our short-term memory. There's a second marker. We pull from what's in front of us in the context, in the environment. There's a third. And we might pull on our technical skill or expertise or experience. So now we have 4 ideas, okay? So here's the math part, and I'm going to ask you, Rich, to step in on this one. If I have 4 ideas that I can hold in mind at any one time, what are the maximum number of combinations? So I'm going to describe thinking for a minute. If thinking is moving these markers around so that I can form the best response to whatever situation I'm facing, a difficult conversation, disruptive change. If thinking is moving these markers around to come up with the maximum number of combinations so that I can really be effective in my response, what's the maximum number of combinations I have when I can hold on to 4 markers? Rich?
Well, I'm cheating a little because when you when I was in the audience recently, I think I stared at you glassy-eyed with an open mouth, and like I couldn't figure it out. But there was somebody more astute than I was that said 4 factorial, and that I had to dust off the high school math, which is 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, right?
Correct. And so the maximum number of combinations that any of us have when we have 4, the maximum times that we can move this around to get the maximum combinations is 24. So in a sense, when I'm calm, when I have all my markers, and this is very important language that we like to inculcate into an organization. When we have all of our markers, we have more combinations, resources to respond to that situation in a more effective way. Now, as we continue on, Tomer, if you want to move to the next slide, it's an important fact of the brain that when we're under pressure, we feel before we think, which is to say that emotion comes before thought. Any information that comes into our nervous system, difficult relationship, difficult change, first goes to this amygdala where it gets checked over for, do I eat it or does it eat me? And when we feel threatened and we don't have tools to manage that amygdala, what happens is we have what's known as an amygdala hijack. And Tomer, if you want to move on, where this amygdala, this emotional part of our brain, hijacks our higher centers, stops complex thinking. We can't think straight. And literally, we've all been there, right? When you know the answer, but you can't quite retrieve that memory file to execute on that idea. And go to the next one, Tomer. So what happens is we go back to our markers, and we can see that. And I want everyone to kind of watch me as I do this, because this is important. Let's say Rich and I are having a difficult conversation, and Rich says something that kind of triggers me. What happens is that I literally drop a marker. And in that moment, the question I want everyone to ask themselves is, did I just lose 25% of combinations in my repertoire of behaviors and responses, or did I lose more? Rich?
I don't even need to reach for the calculator for this one. No, well, you got 3 markers, so 3 times 2 times 1 is 6.
Yeah, so we lost 75%. And we're not able to think as clearly. In fact, if it gets personal and now Rich says something that really kind of upsets me, I can drop another marker. And now I'm into binary thinking, black or white thinking. And now I don't see options. We've all been there, right? Especially in a difficult conversation, which is a big thing we talk about. If we're down markers, we're not as smart. And in fact, the mediating chemical is called cortisol. Cortisol has a half-life of 18 minutes. For 18 minutes, we're not going to be as smart, Rich, and you know this because you know our work. But for everyone out there, this is important. For 18 minutes, we're not going to be as smart as we normally are. And we're not as able to deal with competitive pressures and industry disruption and trying to engage our team. by the way, still have difficult conversations and engage our team. That's a difficult thing to do.
Yeah. This was one of the epiphanies that I had being exposed to the material, because we all have, I mean, one of the things I like about, there are probably three things that I like about JP's program is that this material it's not JP's opinion, it's brain-based scientific research that you can overlay on your personal experience. Secondly, he's a good storyteller, he's got a great sense of humor and good energy. But the applicability of the content is what really got me. And in the days and weeks that followed, being re-exposed and in person to this material, it's just amazing to me how applicable it was, both having those interactions with colleagues at work, or some difficult situation with my family. If you're human and you're talking to other humans, this stuff is directly applicable. And I think that's everybody on planet Earth, right?
Yeah, well, pretty much. I mean, that's the interesting part in all of this. I mean, we all have an emotional brain, like an amygdala, and we are all under pressure. And so for organizations that we work with, in keynotes and in our training side, they love using the markers, because if you and I are having a conversation, Rich, and I'm feeling triggered, I can just simply say, Rich, I'm down a marker. Let's take an 18-minute break. Something as simple as that can manage so much, and people
Right.
love the concrete skills. So the other big piece, because I want people to walk away with something. And by the way, at 11:30 Eastern Time, when we go to the Q&A, I'll talk a little bit more about concrete solutions. But one of the other big pieces, if you're wondering, is how do I manage my amygdala? It's first to understand, what do you do under pressure? What are your signs and symptoms? Right? So we each have different ways that when we're dropping markers, how it shows up. For me, I get hot right here. When I get hot here, I know, okay, JP, are you dropping markers? And do you need to make a decision right now? Because sometimes we have this false sense of urgency. I got to make a decision, because we're in this task, get it done moment, that I sometimes get caught up in that. And a big decision that I have to make, I make a quick decision on when I didn't need to, because of this frenzy that I have.
Right.
And if I don't know I'm down a marker, then I might not be as effective. I might not be as smart. And this is why it's not emotional intelligence or IQ, it's EQ and IQ. And so I think that's the big thing we want people to walk away with. There's a science here that can help you address these big challenges. This is a learnable kind of set of skills. And so, as we're coming to the end of our formal part, Rich, that's what I want people to walk away with, that this is something that you can get leverage on and really bring to your leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. And to understand how, like any machine, to understand how your brain navigates the world and how it responds, and be aware of that, really, speaking from personal experience, it really helps to lead to better decisions and more effectiveness. So we're getting very near the end. I've got 30 minutes after the hour. So unless, JP, you want to add any final closing remarks, we want to respect people's time, thank them for joining us, and anybody that wants to stay connected and take part in the Q&A, we'd welcome that.
Yes, absolutely. So thank you, everyone. Stay on. We'll answer some questions, but it's great having you. Thanks for coming and joining us this morning.
Yeah. So we'll open up the chat to any questions. I get harkening back to what you were talking about with I think you said you feel heat in your forehead. I get a feeling in the back of my neck, like the hairs are standing up, and when I feel that, I really do. I thought about what you said around the notion that a decision is it may be important, but it may not necessarily be urgent.
Yeah. So, Rich, I saw a great question from Bob that asks, okay, what can we do if an executive has dropped a marker? How do we manage that? Well, it's a great question. Thank you, Bob. And here's what I would say. It starts by growing some skills and some knowledge. So literally for people to understand this concept to start. And then number two, not to be afraid to be vulnerable. And I'll tell you a little story about this. So I work with one of the big pension funds in the world, and worked with their CEO and their senior team. And we so I did a keynote or two for the organization. Then the CEO said, geez, I'd love you to work with my senior team. So I met with them once a quarter for a couple of years. This is now, I'm thinking about 18 months ago, I get an email from the CEO. It's a great story where the CEO was in front of his board, and they were making a multi-billion-dollar acquisition decision. So it was a huge deal. And they were meeting for a 2-day retreat. And so at 5 o'clock on the first day, they're making their decision about, do we acquire this business or not? And the board was doing their job. They're doing their due diligence, asking tough questions. But our CEO was feeling, like the questions were getting a bit personal, challenging his assumptions, almost questioning why he wanted to do this. It was because of his legacy. And it doesn't even matter what, but he was starting to really get frustrated. And I'll never forget this because he sent this email to me that night. He said, JP, I wasn't dropping markers. I was throwing markers at that board, right? And it was just, it was hilarious. But the best part, now this is coming back to Bob's question, the best part is that our CEO said to his board, he said, guys, you know what? I'm dropping markers. We need to take an 18-minute break. And the board was like, what are you talking about? And so he actually decided to describe in a few minutes what we just talked about here. And a couple of the board members said, you know what? I think we're down a few markers. Let's take that 18-minute break. They came back 20 minutes later, and they made a really good decision, which was, hey, we're here for 2 days. Right now, we're feeling a bit uptight. Let's relax. Let's go have some drinks. Let's talk about it, and let's come back tomorrow. And they did. They came back tomorrow. And here's the thing. We won't know for a few years whether it was a good decision or not, but the probability that they made a better decision went up because they had more of their markers. They could see more options. They could understand stakeholder needs in a different way versus when it can get very personal and very rigid. And so I just love that story. And so the key is for people to understand the concept and to not be afraid to voice it. I mean, there's this great Japanese proverb, which I love, which says, all of us are smarter than any one of us. And I would just like to add, when we have our markers. And so you can use this language with your team. That's the best part of this, by the way, is that when people understand the language, they don't take it so personal. They're just like, okay, right now, we don't have our markers. Let's take an 18-minute break. And so thank you, Bob, for that great question.
JP, we see, because we're working with, so many different companies and trade groups, I get to see how ideas like this can sort of be woven into the fabric of the culture. And I've seen it time and again where an idea that might take 10 or 15 minutes to really roll out and explain in great detail. And of course, keynoters like you are able to, they're pretty adroit around that, and they're able to do it in a very colorful way so that everybody, quote unquote, gets it. But when you're there, whether it's 2 months, 2 years later, to be able to have a callback term or a common language around the concept, for that guy, he had to explain to the board of directors what dropping markers meant. But to have a term that instantly crystallizes inside the organization, and it's a common language that they can all share, is an incredibly time-saving and productive tool.
It really is. And again, I mentioned at the start of the executive briefing, organizations have less time to do learning because we're moving so fast. So to me, a keynote is a great place to challenge people to think differently, to inculcate with a living language. Lisa had a great question around, what do you do if you have an employee who, is challenging? Yes, and so what do you do? And so here's another kind of almost living language that I think is useful. And I'll kind of do a bit of a digression and come back, Lisa. But in our work, we've found in our research that managers, when they're having a tough conversation with someone, because to me, it's about stepping in and having a more difficult conversation, let's say with this person, to address the issue, whether it's getting them help or coaching or whatever. But we find that managers, when they're having conversations, let's say more difficult or a feedback conversation, many of us get to 85, 90, 92% of what we want to say in that conversation. And then when we get to the last 8%, this is the difficult part of the conversation. This is when the other person feels like there are consequences attached to what we're saying. This is when the other person starts to get emotionally triggered, which is part of Lisa's question. And what's interesting is that a dynamic takes place that most people miss. So that individual starts to trigger. We get infected by their emotion because emotions are infectious, right? We know that from a great study at Harvard Business Medical School, a joint study. Put 3 people into a room. The person most emotionally excitable, whether negatively or positively, will infect the other 2 people within 30 seconds, whether they say a word or not. So we know that we're having that conversation. They get emotionally triggered. We get infected. Now, here's what happens, and here's the trap, and I want everyone to be very mindful of this, is that opposed to approaching that last 8%, we avoid it. And here's the problem. That person can't read our mind. They think we had the full conversation. And in fact, we almost delude ourselves thinking, yeah, I talked about most of the things I wanted to talk about, but we didn't. 2 months later, they're still doing the same thing. We're thinking, what's going on? They're looking at us going, I thought things are on track. Why are you being passive aggressive? Right. The problem is we never had the last 8% conversation. Yep. George Bernard Shaw has this great line. He said, the single biggest barrier to the biggest problem in communication, is the illusion that it has taken place, and it never took place. And so, coming back to Lisa's point, you got to step in and have the conversation, and it's hard. It's very difficult to do. By the way, I mentioned earlier, we have to manage our emotions to be able to step in and have the conversation. Because if we feel threatened, we won't have it. We have to get over barriers of wanting to be liked, right? We have an identity quake. I see myself as being nice. I'm doing something that's not nice, and we quake inside. Emotional intelligence is not about being nice. It's about actually managing when it doesn't feel comfortable, but still stepping into that difficult situation, that precious situation. So to come back, Lisa, I would say the biggest thing is to really practice yourself having these last 8% conversations, so that you can step into the conversation and so they can still hear you and you can deliver what you need to say. Not easy, but thank you, Lisa. I appreciate your note, your question, and your note. So
yeah,
that would be.
I had a thought on that too. And Lisa, anybody who's had to navigate the managerial rung for a year or two has been in that situation where you go into a conversation, you're thinking, oh, buckle up, this is going to be a real treat, because you just know it's going to be a mushroom cloud or there's going to be some incendiary response. And JP, I think that's when the 8% becomes even more implacable. That, and it really is a force of discipline. But the irony is that with the people who have that more, to use Lisa's term, the antonym of that they have more emotional stability, more emotional inertia, and you feel like, this person's got a thick skin. I can just plow right through the 8%. They sometimes are the people that, not that they don't need to hear it, but the person who has got that hair trigger response, you have to be very, very deliberate, and it's human nature to just not have a great time with that 8%. So it's really a self-discipline thing.
It is, and almost to come back to Bob's question earlier, in some ways, if we can inculcate in your organization this language, so dropping markers, but also the last 8% conversation. So again, in organizations we work with all over the world, we find that this becomes living language. Somebody's saying, look, you know what, I think I need to have a last 8% conversation. And it becomes a little less personalized. It's more, hey, because we want to challenge ourselves to be courageous in this organization, I want to have this last 8%. And what we find is that world-class organizations have more frequently last 8% conversations. The interesting part is almost all of the time they have it imperfectly, right? Because we're kind of dropping markers, we're not as effective. But the key is to still do our best to step in, even if we're not going to be perfect, but still have them. Because at the end of the day, people want to know where they stand, right? We're all anxious today, Rich. You are, I am, many of us are. And clarity is the antidote to anxiety. When there's clarity, when we know where we stand, when I know where I stand with my manager, when my people know where they stand with me, we're a little less anxious and we can think more clearly. We still have more of our markers. And to come all the way back to the challenges we talked about at the outset, we can manage disruption. We can move faster. We can take more risks. And because we know that our exceptional leader has our back.
Yeah, the one thing, you said something there about a minute ago that reminded me of something from your book, and that was that to the degree, and this goes back to Lisa's inquiry and question, that to the degree the leader, the manager is coming to that team member and approaching the dynamic through the prism of, I am here to help you. I want you to get better. I want to develop you so that your world is better. And this may be 500 milligrams of tough medicine, but it's something that's going to help you. And if it can be sort of framed in that context, that helps to make the dialogue more of a slightly more benevolent, and I'm investing my time and energy in making your world better.
Yeah, it's interesting, Rich. I think one of the things that we do within our keynotes is we really differentiate between an exceptional and an unexceptional leader to really make it concrete. And I think you've hit on something, Rich, which is that more of the time the exceptional leader really sits there and looks at every situation and they think, how can I use this to develop my people? Almost what we call a developmental bias. I'm going to look for everything, which is, by the way, why you want disruption, because it's another opportunity to develop your people. And it's really changing your thinking from, oh, this is a crisis to this is an opportunity. And that's what an exceptional leader does. The unexceptional leader, and it's interesting because they get very self-focused. They get very isolated. And in terms of, I want everyone who's still on the briefing to think about, what did you give or not give to your unexceptional leader? And Rich, let me ask you that. Think about when you think of if you asked yourself, okay, my unexceptional leader, no names, of course, what did you give or what did you withhold from them in terms of discretionary effort and extra effort?
Yeah, I'll protect their anonymity, but it's I think because you felt like your investment of energy and brainwaves and time and everything, all the other resources that you have, because they were coming to the table with a bit more of the context was a bit more, I can't think of another word other than selfish or self-centered. How can I look good? How can I leverage the resources around me to look good as a leader, as opposed to more of a servant attitude? You almost felt like you were, you were getting duped. You didn't really want to invest a lot of yourself because that was how they were coming to the table.
Yeah. And I think for everyone to think about what you gave or what you withheld. So when we do this in our keynotes, and look, even when I'm speaking in front of 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 people, we can still make it very interactive, which I think is really important in terms of best practice around learning. Interactivity really matters. So we would do an assessment ahead of time to understand the group. We would make it interactive in the moment. That's important. And I think for people to understand, wow, what a different impact the unexceptional had on versus the exceptional. Oh my goodness. And what you're talking about, Rich, I mean, I've heard stories in our work around what the unexceptional leader has done, the impact. And there people talk about, when that person walks in, that manager walks in, they go and hide. They have signals about what mood that leader's in. Now, let me ask you a question. If you're trying to face intense competition or disruption and you're focused on this manager, you're not focused externally on how you can serve a customer. Engagement goes down. And the best part in all of the story, I mean, sounds horrible, this part, but the best part is that it is possible to learn to improve emotional intelligence. You can't increase your IQ. You can increase your EQ or your EI. You can, and that's the great news. And so we find at Keynotes, people get excited and they're like, wow, I want to learn more. And I mean, there's a number of things that we do post-program. So it's important that there's assessment ahead of time, in our opinion. It's important, it's interactive in the Keynote. But after the case, there's a number of sustainment things you can do. And I'll give you just one, Rich, because we're beta testing this right now, but every morning at 9 a.m., and by the way, we can make this available to people on this executive briefing. Every morning at 9 a.m., I'm on Facebook Live, and the title is Mindfulness Live. And for 15 minutes, Tomer, our president, and I engage in a few minutes of discussion about, hey, what does it mean to be an exceptional leader or an exceptional performer or manage under pressure? And then we do about 10 or 12 minutes of mindfulness. So it's a practice, just like I teach my athletes. And then we finish off with some intention for the day. And we do this every day, Monday to Friday. It's free. I mean, I'm saying this because we are so excited, so purposeful around our big, hairy, audacious goal at the Institute for Health and Human Potential, which is to create a world where people manage their emotions more skillfully, more intelligently. And so please join us if you like tomorrow morning. We did it this morning at 9 a.m. And we're just in the beta testing mode. So please, if you come on, give us some comments about how we can make it better. But the idea, though, is that any keynote can't just stand alone. It has to be part of something bigger that grows the living language, it grows concrete schools, and that grows insight.
Right. Just be a little bit more specific. How would they join? Are they going to IHHP?
Yeah, great question, Rich. I mean, we'll send out a link if people want. Happy to do that. But actually, anyone can join. The funny part is we're not publicizing this right now because we're in beta mode. But if anyone right now went on to Facebook and punched in Mindfulness Live.
Homer's ahead of us. He just threw the link up, and yeah, we can follow up.
Perfect. So you can see the link maybe, but we'll also send it to you. But even if you didn't have the link, what's amazing is you can go on to Facebook and punch in Mindfulness Live, and I think you like it, and then you get an update whenever we start every morning, 9 a.m. Eastern time. So thank you, Rich, because I probably wasn't too clear on that.
Sure. No, that makes sense. And did you want to touch on the ebook? I think we were talking about making that an offering.
Yeah, of course. So everyone who is part of this executive briefing, and we're really, really excited by the response that we've received, you're going to get my book, New York Times best-selling book, Performing Under Pressure, for free. We're going to send that to you today as an ebook. I shouldn't say today, but in the next few days, just to be clear. And I mean, it's just a way of us showing our, there it is right there, for our way to show you our gratitude for jumping on. Yeah. This book, just to give you an idea, was based on a study of 12,000 people over 7 years. So I think there's some really great stuff in there around, the science behind pressure, but also some really specific concrete steps and tools and strategies that you can take that we teach to athletes or U.S. Navy, Army, or NFL teams, or Goldman Sachs, or all these different groups who are in pressure situations. And so actually, good job, Tomer, bringing that up, but that's the book.
Yeah, I really, I have an inexorable flow of books coming into my office, given my vocation. But I really, really enjoyed the book. And I think one of the reasons, again, the content, the applicability of the content is inarguable. But what I really liked about the book as I reflect on it is you're almost like a case study of, this is like you told the story about the guy with his board of directors. And when you see a little bit of yourself in someone else's situation, it really kind of brings it to life. And again, I just found so much of this content is so actionable and applicable. It's a very good use of time.
Yeah, it's interesting. When the book came out, we were doing work with, and I probably should maybe not mention their name, but one of the big four accounting firms. And they loved the book. And so we're doing work with them, but then they, our head person read the book, and she was just like, oh my gosh, they bought 2,500 copies, and I've done 18 keynotes with them to various parts of the organization, and everyone is getting a copy because they're just like, we need this. And what was interesting is that the opening anecdote actually was from a big four accounting firm where this partner had to go in front of the SEC around some backdating of options actually around Apple. A true story that I interviewed, for the book. And, what you're saying, Rich, and I feel like now I'm bragging. I don't mean to be bragging, but it's just people really identified with that story because that person just felt like, oh my God, he said, I felt like my head was going to blow off. I was just so feeling the pressure of that moment. And I think that's the thing. We see this. Rich, I know you see this. People are feeling so much pressure today to move fast, to take chances, to try new things. And it's not easy.
No doubt. Yeah. Any kind of, I feel like there were teachings that came out of that when you do get those triggers and you feel like, man, I know I'm in that mode, and as I read the book and saw you live, I was continually amazed. I had a better understanding of it, but in that tough meeting, that tough conversation, and you're sort of sitting there thinking, I'm angry, I'm emotional, and I know there's a solution, I know there's an idea out there, but there's no way I'm going to get it right now. And then there you are 2 hours later sitting at a traffic light thinking, how could I not have come up with that? Because your brain is like back open, you've got all your markers. And so what I really liked about the session, and of course all the content in the book, is how you're able to overlay it on your personal experience. And then with that awareness and cognizance around how your brain is responding under stress, navigate it and just manage it more effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think the truth is that the best investment any of us can make is in ourselves, really, and to understand ourselves. And as we're finishing this executive briefing, and I think we should, kind of finish up now, is I want to challenge everyone to really commit to being a student of human behavior, to really understand yourself. To understand yourself under pressure, to understand yourself in difficult situations. And then ask yourself, hey, how can I do better? How can I grow? My favorite stat of all of our research, high performers are imperfect, but they extract 3 to 5 times more information from the same opportunity to learn as an average performer. I love that stat. Mm-hmm. And so I want to challenge you as we finish to say, how can I take the book in electronic format and learn from it, teach my staff? How can I grow this language within the organization? So, Rich, it was absolutely my pleasure to do this with you. I enjoyed our preparation to get here to today. I've enjoyed today as I knew I would. We love partnering with SpeakInc. I mean, they are really one of the top bureaus in the world. I work with all of them, and SpeakInc is right up there as one of the top bureaus. Really proud to work with you and call you a partner, Rich.
Well, thanks for those kind words, and yeah, it's always a pleasure to work with people where you feel like, boy, this stuff really moves the needle. It's not, anybody who's familiar with the speaker circuit knows that there is a stripe of platitude out there, and the applicability of this stuff is just, I'm really enthusiastic about it. So the pleasure was all mine, and I'm glad we had an opportunity to do the session.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rich. And so we will send out the resource for Mindfulness Live. We'll send out the book. And again, thanks everyone for joining, and we will see you very soon.
Cheers, everybody.
Bye-bye.